Virgo, this reading found you. That is where I want to start. Not with your person, not with the big move, but with the finding and what it means that this specific message arrived in the specific flow of your day at the specific moment you stopped for it, rather than continuing past it into whatever came next. In the ordinary movement of a day, that delivers most content to most people. Without it landing in the particular and specific way, that produced the stopping you made here. The finding is not an accident, and I want to say that with confidence, rather than in the mystical form that such statements sometimes take when they are used without the grounding. That makes them useful, rather than only atmospheric. The finding is not an accident, because the content that lands in someone in the specific and stopping way lands in them because something in them recognized something in it before they consciously knew what it was, or whether it was the thing they did not know they were looking for until the recognition happened, and they stopped. As the visible sign that the recognition had occurred, what was recognized is the specific content of this message and its relevance to what is actually happening in your actual life right now. In the dimension of the connection this reading is about, I want to speak about the moment of the finding in more detail, because the moment itself contains something important for how you receive everything that follows in the rest of this reading. The moment of being found by a reading is the moment in which two timelines intersect. The timeline of the reading, which has been moving toward you through whatever path brought it into the flow of your day, and the timeline of your own interior state, which has been preparing in whatever form your interior prepares for what it needs to receive when the thing it needs arrives in the specific and recognizable form. That produces the stopping. The intersection of those two timelines at this specific moment is not coincidental. It is the result of both timelines moving in the direction of this specific moment from their own separate starting points and arriving here simultaneously in the form of the reading finding you, which is the externally visible description of two timelines intersecting in the specific and relevant moment that the intersection produces. You are ready to be found by this specific reading at this specific moment, and the reading arrived at the moment you were ready, which is the only form of the finding that produces the stopping rather than the continuing past into whatever the ordinary flow would have delivered next. Without the intersection of the two timelines, at the moment that produced the recognition, that stopped you here. Big moves is the phrase in the title, and I want to give it the specific meaning that applies here, because big moves is a phrase that can mean many things in the range from the dramatic and external to the quiet and internal, and the specific form of big moves that this reading is describing is important to understand before the moves arrive, in whatever form they take in your specific situation. Big moves in the relational context are not always visible in the dramatic external form of grand gestures and declarations and significant actions that announce themselves as the big moves. They are in the obvious and unmistakable way of something that is clearly significant from the moment it arrives to the person it arrives for. Sometimes the biggest relational moves are the quiet ones, the specific and internal shifts that produce changes in behavior and in presence and in the quality of how someone shows up for the connection they are in, without announcing themselves as the significant shifts they are, but that are recognized by the person who receives them as something different from what was before. Even without the dramatic external form, that grand gestures provide the big moves coming from your person are in both forms, the internal and the external, and they are connected in the specific way that internal shifts always precede the external moves that follow from them as the natural result of something having shifted inside, before the outside reflects the shift in the visible and receivable form that the external move takes. When the internal shift has completed enough to produce the external that the internal was building toward. The internal shift is already happening in your person right now, in the specific form of something that has been building in them. Over a period you may have been partially aware of or not aware of at all, depending on how much of their interior has been visible to you in the interactions you have had, in whatever form the connection between you currently takes. I want to describe the internal shift in the specific and honest terms that will allow you to recognize it when the external move that follows from it arrives in your life, in whatever form your specific situation delivers it. The internal shift is a decision, not in the conscious and deliberate form of someone sitting down and deciding in the rational and organized way that deliberate decisions are made, but in the deeper and more fundamental form of something having settled in them about you and about the connection between you and about what they want from the future of the connection that has not yet been expressed in the visible and direct form that the external move will bring. When the internal settling is complete enough to produce the move, the decision is in favor of you. I want to say that directly because this is a love reading and the decision is a love decision in the specific and full form of something that has settled in someone about the specific person they want and what they want from the connection and what they are preparing to do to move the connection in the direction the decision has identified as the right direction. For both of them, the decision in favor of you is the big move beneath the big move, and everything that follows in the external and visible form of the actions and the words and the gestures and the presence that are coming from your person in the near and specific future that this reading is pointing toward is the expression of that prior and deeper decision rather than the decision itself, which has already been made in the interior of the person making it, even if they do not know yet in the fully conscious form that it has been made, the decision has been made in the part of them that makes decisions before the rational mind has confirmed them. And what is coming now is the process of the rest of them catching up to what has already been decided in the deepest and most settled part of who they are in relation to you. Whew. I want to describe what the catching up feels like from inside your person as it is happening right now, because I think understanding what they are experiencing in the interior process of the catching up changes how you receive what they produce externally from a place of fuller understanding rather than only observation of what is visible without the interior context that this reading is providing. The catching up feels like clarity arriving in the specific and recognizable form of something that was previously uncertain or unclear or held in the ambiguous form of something that had not yet settled enough to be known in the direct and confident form that settled things take when they are no longer in the process of settling, but have settled into the stable and grounded form that the decision has now taken in the deepest part of your person. The clarity feels like relief to the person experiencing it, not the relief of something difficult being over, but the relief of something uncertain becoming certain in the specific and embodied form of someone who knows now what they want and who they want it with and what they are going to do to move toward what they want with the person they want it with, which is you, in the specific and unambiguous form of the decision that has been made. And the relief that follows it, the catching up also feels like urgency. The specific and motivating form of someone who knows what they want and is aware of the time that has passed without the full expression of the wanting and who wants the gap between the internal decision and the external expression of it to close as quickly as it can close. Now that the settling has produced the clarity, that makes the closing possible in the confident and grounded form of someone who knows what they are moving toward and is ready to move. The urgency is what produces the big moves in the form they are taking. And at the pace they are taking it, which is faster than the pace of the preceding period, when the uncertainty was still present and the settling was still in process, and the external expression was not yet possible, in the confident and grounded form that the internal decision has now made available, that the external big moves will take as the catching up completes and the decision produces its external expressions in the visible and receivable form of actions and words that arrive in the space between you as the signals of what has shifted inside them. The first external form is increased presence in the specific and unmistakable way of someone who is showing up more fully in the connection between you than they have been showing up in whatever form the connection has been taking in the period that preceded the internal shift that is now producing the increased presence as its first and most immediate external expression. The increased presence looks like more contact, more attention in the contact that happens, more of the quality of being fully there rather than partially there, in the form that presence takes when the person providing it is actually in the connection rather than adjacent to it, in the managed and partial form of someone who has not yet made the internal decision that makes full presence, the natural expression of where they actually are in relation to the connection. The second external form is directness, the specific and sometimes surprising quality of someone who says something clearly that has previously been said indirectly or partially or not at all, because the internal settling had not yet produced the clarity that directness requires before it is possible in the full and unambiguous form that the internal decision now enables. The directness will arrive in the form of something being said that you may have been waiting to hear, or not waiting in the patient and hopeful form, but in the unspoken and unsaid form of something that felt like it needed to be said between you and your person, and that has not yet been said in the specific and clear way that the decision now makes possible for the person who has made it and who is now in the process of expressing it in the external and visible form of the directness that follows. When internal settling is complete enough for the direct expression to be possible. And the third external form is action, the specific and concrete form of someone who moves in the direction of what they want with the confidence of someone who knows what they want because the internal decision has clarified it in the way that internal decisions clarify what the person making them wants to move toward and what they are willing to do to move toward it in the real and visible dimension of their actual life, rather than only in the interior dimension where the decision has been living until the external expression is ready to follow it. The action is the big move in its most dramatic and visible form, and it is coming from a person who has the internal settling behind it. That makes the action the natural and proportionate expression of what has been decided, rather than the impulsive or fearful or managed action. That comes from someone who has not yet made the internal decision. That grounds the action in something deeper and more stable than the moment that produced it. Huh. Now I want to speak about you and what you need to be in as the big moves arrive from the person who has made the internal decision and is now in the process of expressing it in the three external forms I described that are each the big move in a different register of the same fundamental shift that is happening in them. Be receivable in the specific and open form of someone who has not pre-decided how to receive what is coming or what it means or what it requires of them in response before the receiving has happened, in the actual and present form of the increased presence arriving and the directness being said and the action being taken, pre-deciding how to receive the big moves before they arrive is the most available way of missing them or receiving only the partial form of them that the pre-decided response allows in, rather than the full form that the open and receivable presence makes available to the person who is fully present when the big moves arrive, rather than in the pre-decided response that was prepared for them before they had a chance to arrive in their actual form. I want to say something about what being receivable actually requires of you in the specific and practical form of what it looks like from the inside of someone who is doing it, rather than only describing it as the state to be in when the big moves arrive. Being receivable requires the suspension of the protective responses that previous experiences of not receiving what was hoped for have installed in you as the rational and understandable protection against the repetition of that not receiving in the form of another arrival that does not deliver what the hoping was hoping for before the arrival. The protection is reasonable and it has served you in the situations where the arrival did not deliver what was hoped for and where the protection prevented the full weight of the not delivering from landing in the unprotected form that it would have landed in without the protection in place. But this arrival is different, and the protection, while understandable, is also the thing that would prevent the full receiving of what this specific arrival is carrying in the form of the decision that has been made in favor of you and the big moves that are expressing it. Lower the protection for this specifically and let the big moves land in the unprotected and fully receiving form of someone who trusts that what is coming from the person who has made the decision is worth receiving. In the complete form it is being offered in, rather than in the reduced form that the protection would allow before the full landing has had the chance to happen, because you were ready to be found in the specific form of someone who needed to know before the big moves arrived what was coming and from what internal place in your person it was coming from, so that the receiving could be as complete as the giving is prepared to be when the person who has made the internal decision arrives at the external expression of it in the form of the big moves that the title is promising and that are already in motion from the interior of the person making them toward the visible space between you, where they will arrive and land in whatever specific form your specific situation delivers them in. Expect big moves from your person in the increased presence form and the directness form and the action form, all of them, the expression of the internal decision that has already been made in the deepest and most settled part of the person who is coming toward you, with everything they have decided in your favor, finally ready to be expressed in the full and external form that the internal decision always eventually produces when it is as settled as this one is. This reading found you, and your person is already moving in the form of the big moves that are already in motion toward the open and receivable space that you are now in, having been found by the reading that was always going to find you at exactly this moment when the person you are connected to has made the decision that is producing the moves that are coming for you specifically.